My Alpha's chief of staff booked her a blind date with the wrong Calloway sister, and by the time the fire alarm stopped ringing, she'd chosen me instead. To understand how a woman who was supposed to be invisible ended up wearing the veil name, I have to go back to the Tuesday my mother handed me a clipboard and told me to make myself useful. That was always the instruction. Useful, not seen. I was 29 years old, working logistics for a boutique catering company called Thistle and Row, and I had spent most of my adult life standing 3 feet behind my sister Marisol with a clipboard, a stain pen, and a spine that had learned not to expect applause. Marisol was the beautiful one. Marisol was the one who closed deals and got engagement rings and had her photograph in the society pages twice a year. I was the one who made sure her photographs happened on schedule. My mother called me into the kitchen that afternoon holding a cream envelope like it was a winning lottery ticket. "The Veil Heiress," she said, "has agreed to meet your sister for dinner." She said it the way other mothers announced grandchildren. Renata Calloway had spent 3 years watching our family's public relations firm bleed clients, and she had decided, somewhere in that bleeding, that the fastest transfusion available was Marisol's hand in an advantageous marriage. The Veil name would do more for us in 1 season than a decade of press releases. I didn't ask why nobody had considered marrying me off instead. I already knew. Augusta Veil was famous the way a locked vault is famous. You heard about her. You didn't meet her. The tabloids called her the Frost of Veil House, and they meant it as a compliment to her stock price and an insult to everything else. 12 hotels, 4 cities, 1 flagship restaurant so exclusive it didn't list a phone number. She had taken over the company at 26 when her mother died, and her father decided grief was a scheduling conflict he didn't have time for. She had not, as far as anyone could report, smiled in public since. "You'll come too," my mother said, not quite looking at me. "Handle the details. Make sure nothing embarrasses her." Her meant Marisol. It always meant Marisol. I said yes because I always said yes, and because some very old, very tired part of me still believed that if I did the job well enough, someday someone would notice who had actually done it. I went home and pressed my one good black dress and packed a folder of contingency notes the way I packed everything, thoroughly, invisibly, in case the world fell apart and nobody else was prepared to catch it. I have always been prepared to catch it. My father made sure of that. Captain Ellis Calloway ran Engine 14 for 19 years before a stairwell in a burning warehouse gave out under him 3 days before my 15th birthday. He used to bring me to the station on Sundays and let me time him pulling gear, 43 seconds, 41, 39, teaching me to read a room the way he read smoke, where it was thin, where it was lying, where the exits actually were, versus where people wished they were. After he died, I kept his brass whistle in a drawer for 6 years before I started carrying it. I don't know when it stopped being grief and started being armor. It rode in my coat pocket that night, small and cold against my hip, the same way it rode there every night, which is a detail I would not think mattered until it did. The restaurant was called the Gilded Larch, and it sat on the 40th floor of Vale Tower, behind a door with no sign, only a brass larch leaf pressed into the wood. I arrived 90 minutes early, as instructed, to walk the room, check the flowers against Marisol's dress, confirm the sommelier knew she didn't drink red. I was kneeling by the private dining room sideboard resetting a crooked candle when the door opened and a woman walked in 40 minutes before anyone expected her, and the air in the room changed before I even turned around. I smelled her before I saw her. Black pepper, and something colder underneath it, like rain on iron left out all winter. I have never been able to explain to anyone why that combination made my chest go tight, only that it did, immediately, the way a smoke alarm goes off before you've located the fire. "You're not the reservation," she said, "not a question." 4 words, flat as a countertop, and I felt every one of them land somewhere under my ribs. I straightened up too fast and knocked the candle again. "No," I said, "I'm the reservation's logistics." Something moved behind her eyes that might have been amusement, if amusement were allowed anywhere near that face. She was tall in the particular way that made rooms rearrange themselves, dressed in charcoal so dark it looked wet, and she was looking at me like I was a discrepancy in a spreadsheet she intended to resolve before dinner. "Augusta Vale," she said, and didn't offer her hand because alphas like her didn't have to. "Wren Calloway," I said, and didn't offer mine either, because I'd learned a long time ago not to reach for things that weren't going to be taken. She was still looking at me when the first fire alarm of the night went off, 40 minutes before my sister ever walked through that door. And neither of us knew yet that it would be the second one that mattered. The alarm turned out to be a burnt saucepan 2 rooms over, resolved in 90 seconds by a red-faced sous chef and a great deal of apologizing to no one in particular. Augusta Vale did not react to it at all, which I noticed, because by then I had already started cataloging things about her the way I cataloged exits. She checked the time. She checked the door. She did not check her reflection once, which told me more about her than anything the tabloids had ever printed. Marisol arrived at 7 exactly, luminous in emerald silk, and for 11 minutes it was, by every visible measure, a successful date. My sister was good at this. She asked about the hotel expansion into Lisbon. She laughed at the correct moments. I stood near the sideboard refilling water glasses and being furniture, which was the job, and I was good at the job, and I told myself that was enough the way I always told myself that was enough. It was the kitchen fire at 7:52 that changed the shape of the evening. I smelled the smoke before the alarm caught it, the particular acrid sweetness of grease going wrong, and some old trained part of me was already moving before my brain finished the sentence. The line cook nearest the pass had a towel on fire and didn't know it yet, sleeve catching from a flare up on the flat top, and the automatic suppression system was 11 seconds from dumping chemical retardant across $40,000 of open flame cooking equipment and, more urgently, across a human arm. "Down," I said, and grabbed the fire blanket from the hook by the service door, because I had clocked that hook on my first walk through, the way I clocked every exit in every room I had ever stood in. I smothered his sleeve, rolled him twice against the floor the way my father taught me at 11 years old in our backyard with a burning trash can lid, and had the manual override on the suppression panel flipped before the first chemical canister triggered, because dumping retardant on an open flame from that angle would have sent flaming grease across the pass and into the dining room where 40 guests were still holding wine glasses. The whole thing took under a minute. Nobody in the private dining room even heard it happen over the string quartet. Except Augusta Vale had gotten up from the table the second the smoke smell reached her, walked to the kitchen door, and watched the entire 90 seconds from the threshold without saying a word. I was on my knees checking the cook's arm for burns, my father's whistle having slid halfway out of my coat pocket onto the tile, when I looked up and found her staring at me like I had rearranged the furniture of her understanding of the evening. "Where," she said, low, "did you learn to do that?" I put the whistle back in my pocket with hands that were only shaking a little. "My father was a fire captain," I said. "I was supposed to be a caterer's assistant tonight. I don't know what I was supposed to be just now." "You were exactly what that room needed," she said. Nobody else in this building even noticed. Marisol noticed. Marisol noticed everything that happened to her evening, and she arrived in the kitchen doorway 2 seconds later with her mother's particular talent for making a crisis about herself. Ren, my God, you're covered in soot. Go clean up. You're embarrassing. She stopped because Augusta Vale had turned to look at her with an expression that could have frozen the sauce on the stove. Your sister just kept your restaurant from catching fire in front of your dinner guests, Augusta said. I don't think embarrassing is the word you're looking for. I have relived that sentence more times than I will ever admit to anyone. Nobody had ever defended me out loud before, not like that, not immediately, not before I had even asked to be defended. Marisol's face did something complicated and went smooth again fast, socialite muscle memory. Of course, she said. I only meant the soot. The date resumed, technically. Augusta returned to the table, finished her wine, asked Marisol 2 more polite questions about Lisbon, but she had stopped looking at the woman across from her and started, without apparent shame, watching the doorway I kept passing through with fresh napkins and a heart that would not slow down. When dessert came, she stood, thanked my sister with the exact correct number of words for a first date that would not be having a second one, and asked the room, to nobody's specific address, whether the woman who'd handled the kitchen fire could show her the private elevator. There is no private elevator that requires an escort. We both knew that. I got my code anyway. The elevator down from the 40th floor took 40 seconds, and Augusta Vale spent 38 of them looking at me like a problem she had decided, quietly, to solve. I have a restaurant group with worse fire protocols than a woman with a caterer's clipboard, she said. That should embarrass me more than it does. It should, I agreed. Your suppression panel override needs a 2-second delay built in. If I hadn't known the manual sequence, you'd have lost the whole pass. Say that again in my office on Monday, she said. To the person whose job it is to know that, and apparently doesn't. Are you offering me a job or reporting a safety violation? Both, she said, and the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, gold and marble and cold air that smelled, underneath the building's cologne of money, like her, black pepper, rain-struck iron, something patient. 10 o'clock. Ask for me directly. Don't let my assistant reschedule you into a hallway meeting. He does that to people he thinks won't push back. I might not be a person who pushes back. She looked at me for a long moment, the elevator doors trying twice to close and giving up against her stillness. You put your body between a fire and a stranger's arm 11 minutes after we met, she said. I think you push back plenty. You've just never had anyone worth pushing back at. She left before I could answer. Black coat, cold air, gone through the revolving door into a car that pulled away before the concierge had finished announcing it. I stood in that lobby for a full minute with my father's whistle warm now in my palm, my sister's furious voicemail already lighting up my phone, and the absolute, bone-deep certainty that something in my life had just been knocked permanently off its rails, and that I did not want it put back. I did not sleep that night, and not because of the voicemail, though there were 4 of those too, each one colder than the last. My mother called at 11 and again at 11:40, and I let both go to voicemail because I already knew the shape of what she'd say. That I had ruined months of careful positioning, that Marisol's chance at rescuing the family firm had walked out of that restaurant in a stranger's coat, that I had once again made myself the center of an evening that was never supposed to be about me. I lay in bed replaying 38 seconds in an elevator instead, the particular way Augusta Vale said worth pushing back at, like she'd been keeping the phrase somewhere and had only just found a reason to spend it. Vale Tower's lobby at 10 the next morning looked nothing like it had the night before. Daylight turned the marble merciless, and I felt every seam of my one good blazer as I gave my name to a security desk staffed by a man who clearly did not believe me. He called upstairs twice before a broad-shouldered man in his 40s came down himself to collect me, radiating the specific weariness of someone who had been doing this job long enough to have opinions about it. "Dax Oyeleran," he said, shaking my hand with more warmth than the lobby had shown me so far. "Chief of Staff. You're the fire blanket. Ren Calloway. I know who you are. I've been trying to get that woman to hire a real crisis consultant for 2 years, and she does it in one elevator ride because you saved a line cook's arm." He said it without rancor, more like a man reporting weather. Come on. She's already rearranged her whole morning around you, which, for the record, has happened exactly never. The 41st floor was glass on 3 sides, city spread out under a flat gray sky, and Augusta Vale stood at the window with her back to the door in the same charcoal stillness she'd worn the night before, like the color was less a wardrobe choice than a permanent condition. She turned when Dax announced me, and I caught, underneath the black pepper and iron, something warmer moving through the room, and told myself it was the heating vents. "You came," she said. "You said 10 o'clock. People say yes to me and don't show up more often than you'd think." She gestured at the chair across from her desk, an actual desk, not a boardroom table, which felt like its own kind of confession. "I looked into your background this morning. Thistle and Rowe has you filed as an assistant coordinator. Your performance reviews call you reliable 4 separate times and never once call you anything else." I sat down and folded my hands, an old habit, the posture of a woman who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Reliable is accurate. Reliable is what you call competence you haven't bothered to reward, she said. "I want you consulting on crisis protocols across the restaurant division. Full audit access, direct reporting line to me, salary triple whatever they're paying you to hold clipboards for your sister. You don't know anything about me beyond 90 seconds with a fire blanket. I know you read the exits in a room you'd never been in before I finished my entree," she said. "I know you carry something in your coat pocket you touch when you're deciding whether to trust someone. You did it twice last night, and you're doing it right now." I stopped, my fingers already curled around my father's whistle without my having noticed. Something in my chest went hot and unguarded. "I know competence when I watch it work," she went on, quieter now. "Because I have spent 11 years surrounded by people who perform confidence and call it the same thing." "It isn't the same thing. That's not a job offer," I said. "That's a compliment with a salary attached." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one deciding whether the building could bear its weight. "Both can be true. I should have said no. Some later, wiser version of myself would tell you I should have said no, that a woman who smelled like winter and controlled 12 hotels was not a safe thing to fall toward at the speed I was already falling. But I thought of my mother's clipboard, my sister's emerald silk, 29 years of being the reliable one nobody thought to reward, and I said yes before I'd finished deciding to. "Monday," Augusta said, standing, extending her hand for the first time since we'd met, and I took it, and the current that ran up my arm at the contact had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with the particular terrifying sensation of being, for the first time in memory, entirely seen. "Welcome to Vale Hospitality, Miss Calloway." "Ren," I said. "Ren," she repeated, like she was testing the weight of it, and something in the way she said my name told me the elevator ride had not been an anomaly. It had been a decision. The penthouse offices of Vale Hospitality occupied the top 4 floors of the tower, and my new desk, when I found it Monday morning, sat one door from Augusta's own, a placement Dax informed me, dryly, that had caused 2 department heads to request transfers out of pure spite. They're used to being the closest thing to her. he said, dropping a stack of protocol binders on my desk with the air of a man delivering an artillery shipment. You lasted 4 days, and you're already closer than any of them got in 4 years. I told myself it was proximity for efficiency, nothing more, even as the days accumulated evidence against that theory. Augusta remembered, from one offhand comment over a working lunch, that I hated cilantro, and every meal ordered into that lunch afterward arrived quietly, correctly, without it. She remembered I'd mentioned my father used to make a particular lemon cake for my birthday, a recipe lost when he died before he wrote it down, and I came in one Thursday to find a lemon cake on my desk from a bakery 2 boroughs away that didn't deliver, with a card that said only, not the recipe, but close. I asked around. I sat with that card in my hands for 10 minutes before I could make myself go back to work. The wealth gap announced itself in textures, not numbers. My apartment had exposed pipes and a radiator that knocked like a fist. Augusta's penthouse, which I saw for the first time when a crisis audit ran late and she waved me up rather than send me home in the rain, had floors that didn't creak, silence so complete it felt engineered, art on the walls that made no attempt to explain itself to visitors. A member of her senior PR staff, a sharp-jawed woman named Corinne, made a point of walking past my desk twice a day just to look at me the way one looks at a stain that hasn't been explained yet. She's slumming, Corinne said to another staffer once, not quite quietly enough, as I passed with a stack of files. It won't last. It never does with her. She gets bored of projects. I didn't correct her. I filed it, the way I filed everything, in a drawer marked things I will not think about until I have to. The first real touch happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks in, over an incident report neither of us needed to be reading together at 9 at night. I reached for the same page she was reaching for, and our hands landed stacked, hers over mine, and neither of us moved for 4 full seconds that felt considerably longer. You should go home, she said, not moving her hand. You should let me, I said, not moving mine. She laughed. Actually laughed, a short surprised sound like she'd startled it out of herself, and Dax, passing the open door at that exact moment, stopped dead in the hallway, with an expression I would later learn was the specific face of a man watching 4 years of accumulated worry finally have somewhere to go. In 15 years, he told me later, at a coffee cart 3 blocks from the tower, unprompted, like a man finally allowed to say something he'd been rehearsing, I have never once seen her wait for anyone. She waits for you like it costs her nothing. I don't know what you did. I don't think you know what you did either. I didn't. I only knew that 4 days later, Augusta's assistant informed me my presence was required at a board dinner I had no professional reason to attend, and that the summons came with a dress code and no explanation, and that some old, careful part of me understood, standing in front of my closet with my father's whistle in my palm, that whatever this was, it had stopped being containable weeks ago, and neither of us had said so out loud yet. The board dinner was where I learned why they called her the Frost. She wore it like armor from the moment the elevator doors opened onto the private dining room. Spine straight, voice flattened into the register she used for people who wanted things from her. I watched 14 board members compete for 30 seconds of her attention and watched her give each of them exactly enough to be unimpeachable and not one syllable more. It was a masterclass in a kind of loneliness I hadn't seen up close before, and by the time the room emptied and we were alone on the terrace with the city glittering cold below us, I understood I had spent 3 weeks falling for a woman I had only just started to actually meet. You go somewhere when you're in that room, I said. I watched you leave twice tonight, and your body never moved. She didn't answer immediately. The wind off the terrace carried her scent toward me, black pepper and iron, and under it, tonight, something that smelled almost like exhaustion. My mother died when I was 19, she said finally, to the skyline rather than to me. Cancer, slow, the kind that gives you 18 months to watch someone disappear one afternoon at a time. My father did not attend the funeral reception. He held a board call instead in the room next door, and when I asked him why, he told me grief was a liability shareholders could smell on you, and that veils did not bleed in public. She turned then, and the terrace lights caught something in her face I hadn't seen before, not frost at all. Just a woman who had been cold for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't the only available temperature. I was 26 when he stepped down and handed me 12 hotels, and that sentence like it was an inheritance worth having. I have spent 5 years proving him right by accident every single day since. That's not proof, I said. That's a scar wearing his handwriting. Something moved through her face, fast, unguarded, gone before I could name it. That's the first time anyone has said something like that to me and meant it instead of billing me for it. I don't bill for honesty, I said. I'm reliable. Remember, it's free. She laughed again. That same startled sound, closer this time, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her despite the November air. And for one suspended second, I thought she was going to close the distance between us entirely. Then her phone buzzed against the terrace railing, and whatever had been about to happen folded itself back into the careful shape she wore for board dinners, and she stepped back. And the aftershock of that almost moment sat in my chest all the way home, like a held breath I couldn't release. I didn't know yet how much closer the world was about to force us. I only knew, riding the elevator down alone, that I had seen the Frost of Vale house cry exactly one tear on that terrace and pretend, immediately, that she hadn't, and that some new and terrifying part of me had already decided I would spend whatever it cost to see her do it again, where she didn't have to pretend. The storm hit Vale Tower's flagship hotel opening in Portland 3 weeks later. On a night that had been planned down to the minute for 11 months, I flew out as part of the crisis team, officially, my actual job title, finally catching up to what I'd been doing since the fire blanket. 200 guests, a live orchestra, a rooftop unveiling scheduled for 9 sharp, and a freak ice storm that took out the building's backup generator 40 minutes before doors opened. I found the fault in the transfer switch in 6 minutes flat, the kind of diagnosis my father used to do blind by smell and sound alone, and had backup power routed through the service elevators before the hotel's own engineers had finished arguing about jurisdiction. Augusta found me afterward in the stairwell between the 18th and 19th floors, both of us catching our breath, both of us soaked from the sleet that had gotten in through the loading dock, and the door locked behind her with the particular finality of hardware that had not been designed with romance in mind. "We're stuck," she said. I noticed. Dax has a key. He'll be a while. He's currently telling 200 guests the power outage was intentional ambiance. I laughed, and the sound of it in the concrete stairwell came back at us doubled, and Augusta was looking at me in the emergency lighting's dull red glow, like the storm outside had finally given her permission to stop performing composure. "You could have been anywhere tonight," she said. "You could have stayed in the ballroom and let the engineers handle it, and nobody would have faulted you. You'd have faulted me." "I would have," she admitted, "though not for the reason you think." She stepped closer, close enough now that her scent filled the narrow stairwell entirely, black pepper and rain-cold iron, and, underneath it tonight, something that smelled like want held carefully in both hands. "I keep finding reasons to be in rooms you're in." I told myself for 3 weeks it was efficient staffing. It stopped being efficient staffing around the time I started rearranging my calendar to make sure of it. "Augusta, tell me to stop," she said, "and I will." I need you to know that before I say anything else. Whatever this is, it stops the second you need it to. I closed the last of the distance myself, because I had spent 29 years waiting to be chosen, and I was done waiting for permission to choose back. Don't stop, I said, and she kissed me in a locked stairwell during a power outage with sleet drumming on the roof access door 11 floors above us. Careful at first, like she was still braced for me to change my mind, and then not careful at all when I didn't. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing hard, and I felt her hand find the whistle-shaped weight in my coat pocket without either of us saying anything about it, like she'd been cataloging me the same way I'd been cataloging her. I don't know how to do this halfway, she said against my mouth. I've never done anything halfway in my life. I don't know how to start with you. Then don't start halfway, I said, and the stairwell door opened above us on Dax's flashlight, and a very deliberate coughing sound, and we stepped apart laughing, soaked and unhidden, and I understood, climbing those stairs back toward the party, that something in both of us had just changed its shape permanently, and that neither of us had any intention of changing it back. The weeks after Portland were the softest of my life, and I say that as a woman who did not know, until then, that softness was a thing available to me at all. Augusta told me about her mother in full one Sunday morning, cross-legged on her penthouse floor in sweatpants I never would have believed she owned, describing Eleanor Vale's laugh, her terrible taste in music, the specific blue cardigan she wore every winter that Augusta still couldn't look at in store windows 6 years later. I told her about my father in return, the whistle, the stairwell drills, the way grief had turned into competence because competence was the only version of him I got to keep. She held the whistle in her palm like it was made of something more fragile than brass, and said, quietly, he'd have liked watching you work that fire blanket, and I cried for the first time in front of another person since the funeral, and she let me. And didn't try to fix it, just held on. We cooked badly together in her kitchen that had clearly never been used for anything more ambitious than coffee, and she confessed, deadpan, that she could run a merger in her sleep and could not, under any circumstances, be trusted around a stovetop, a claim I verified personally when she set off the smoke detector attempting scrambled eggs and looked so genuinely betrayed by the appliance that I laughed until I couldn't breathe. My mother's calls kept coming, colder each time, Marisol's silence loud in the spaces between them, but for 3 weeks I let myself not answer. Let myself exist entirely inside the particular warmth of being chosen by someone who never chose anything without meaning it. It couldn't last, of course. Nothing that soft ever gets to, not without a fight first. The article ran on a Thursday morning under a headline designed to be quoted, "Vale Heiress's new consultant was never meant to be her sister's replacement. Sources say Calloway family in turmoil." It quoted an anonymous source close to the family describing me as calculating, opportunistic, a woman who had engineered her way from clipboard to penthouse by exploiting a fire she'd allegedly known how to prevent from the start. It ran a photo of me from the Portland opening, soaked and laughing in Augusta's arms, captioned like evidence. I knew the phrasing before I finished the second paragraph. I knew it the way you know your own mother's voice, with the sound turned off. Engineered her way. Renata Calloway's words, verbatim. The same accusation she'd made in the family kitchen the morning after the Gilded Larch, dressed up now in a stranger's byline. Corinne had the article printed and sitting on my desk before 9, no note necessary. By noon, Thistle and Rowe had called to inform me my services were no longer required, effective immediately, citing conflict of interest with a client relationship they'd apparently only just noticed. By 2, Augusta's board had convened an emergency call I wasn't invited to, and by 4, Dax found me in the stairwell, A different stairwell, no storm this time. Just me and a lot of very quiet crying I hadn't let anyone see, and told me, gently, that the board was pressuring her to distance herself from the story before the quarterly numbers came out. "She hasn't said that to me," I said. "She won't," Dax said. "That's not who she is. She'll try to fix it without telling you it needs fixing, and she'll do it by pulling away first because that's the only version of protecting someone her father ever taught her." He crouched down to my level, this gruff, tired man who had watched her for 15 years, and said, "Quieter. Don't let her do that to both of you." I found her that evening exactly where I expected to, at the window on the 41st floor with her back to the door, and I knew before she turned around that the mask was already sliding back into place. "I'm having legal draft a statement," she said, not turning. "It'll clarify the timeline. Your position was earned, not given." "That's not what I'm asking about. I've also asked Corinne to reduce your public visibility for a few weeks. Until this settles." "Augusta, it's the smart move," she said, and finally turned, and her face had gone back to the boardroom register, flat and careful, and 1,000 miles from the woman who'd cried holding my father's whistle 3 weeks ago. "I built this company by never letting sentiment become a liability shareholders could smell. I can't watch you get burned for loving someone who forgot that." "You're doing it," I said, and my voice cracked on it, "right now. You're doing the exact thing your father did. You're leaving the room while your body's still standing in it." She didn't answer. That was the worst part. She didn't deny it, and she didn't stop it, and I stood in that glass office with the city going gray and cold below us, and understood that the frost had found its way back to the surface exactly when it mattered least to let it. And I left before I said something I couldn't unsay, coat pocket heavy with the one thing in the world that had never once let me down. I quit the same week, before anyone could quietly reduce my visibility on my behalf. I packed the contents of my desk into a single box, the lemon cake card still folded inside a drawer I couldn't make myself throw away, and walked out of Vale Tower into a rain that had been falling, unbroken, for 2 days straight, the kind of rain that made the whole city look like it was grieving something it couldn't name. I didn't cry until I got home. Then, I didn't stop for a long time. Marisol called that night, the first time in weeks, and I almost didn't answer until I heard the particular unsteadiness in her voice that meant she wasn't calling to gloat. "It was Mom," she said, no preamble. The source in the article. I found the email chain. She's been feeding a reporter for 2 weeks, ever since she found out Thistle and Rowe was letting you go for real, not because of a story, because she called them first and told them to. I sat down hard on my kitchen floor, phone pressed to my ear, rain still drumming the window behind me. "Why would you tell me that?" "Because I watched a woman defend you in a kitchen doorway the first night you met her," Marisol said, and her voice cracked in a way I had genuinely never heard from her, not once in 29 years. And I have never once in my life watched anyone defend you, Ren, including me, and I have spent 3 weeks hating you for getting chosen instead of feeling sick about how long it took somebody to actually choose you at all. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix what Mom did, but I'm not going to sit here and let you think you deserved it. I didn't know what to do with that. An apology from the sister I'd spent a lifetime standing 3 feet behind, arriving at the exact moment I had nothing left to defend myself with. I thanked her, quietly, and hung up, and sat on my kitchen floor a long time turning my father's whistle over in my hands, thinking about rooms where nobody noticed you, and rooms where somebody finally did, and then let the noticing get taken away from both of you by people who had never once had to earn anything they were handed. I didn't know yet that across town, in a glass office on the 41st floor, Augusta Vale had spent the same 3 days refusing every meal Dax brought her, staring at a lemon cake bakery's delivery confirmation from 6 weeks earlier like it was the only evidence she had left that softness had ever been real, and that the board's pressure campaign was about to run headlong into something they had badly underestimated. A woman who had spent her whole adult life being cold on command, discovering, 3 days too late, that she would rather burn the whole company down than spend 1 more hour proving her father right. Augusta found me on the 4th day, not the other way around, which told me something before she said a single word. She arrived at my apartment building without an assistant, without a car idling at the curb, hair damp from rain she hadn't bothered to outrun, and when I opened the door she looked, for the first time since I'd met her, entirely undefended. "I fired Corinne this morning," she said. "She'd known about your mother's emails for a week. She sat on them because burying the story looked cleaner than defending you publicly, and I let her make that call for me, because some coward's voice in my head that sounds exactly like my father told me it was the smart move." She swallowed hard. "I've spent 5 years running from the one lesson he ever taught me, and I nearly let it cost me you in under 4 days. I am not going to let it finish the job." "You already let it start the job," I said, because I was still raw, still standing in a doorway with my whole chest hurting. "You went cold the second it got expensive to be warm." "I know," she said. "I'm not here to argue you out of that, it's true. I'm here because the board called an emergency session for tomorrow morning to formally request I distance the company from, and I'm quoting the memo, reputational risk associated with personal entanglements. And I intend to walk into that room and tell all 14 of them that the reputational risk is a company built by a man who thought love was a liability, and that I would rather lose the account than keep pretending he was right." Her voice shook on the last of it, more unguarded than the terrace, more unguarded than the stairwell, more unguarded than I had ever heard her. "I don't want you back, because it's the smart move. I want you back because the 4 days without you have been the only genuinely stupid decision I've made in 5 years of running this company, and I am begging you to let me make a better one." "Tell me to trust you," I said, "and mean it. Not the smart move. Mean it." "I mean it," she said. "I love you." I should have said that on the terrace, and I let a boardroom talk me out of it, and I am done letting boardrooms talk me out of anything that matters. I kissed her in the doorway, with the rain still falling around both of us, and it tasted like relief, and when we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine the way she had 11 floors above a locked stairwell, and I understood we weren't finished yet, not with her mother's ghost or my mother's betrayal, or a boardroom that thought 14 votes outranked a fire blanket, but that we were, for the first time since the article ran, standing in the same room instead of 2 separate ones, and that whatever came next, we would meet it there together. The board session happened the next morning, and I was not invited, and I went anyway, because I had spent my whole life waiting outside rooms where decisions got made about me, and I was done doing that too. 14 board members sat around a table built for people who had never once had to explain themselves, and Augusta stood at the head of it in the charcoal she wore like armor, except this time I understood the armor was for them, not for me. Dax stood by the door with a folder he'd clearly been assembling for days, and when Augusta gave him a small nod, he opened it and began reading. In his flat, unhurried voice, an itemized timeline, the emails between Renata Calloway and the reporter, verified through a source at the paper who'd been horrified enough by the ethics of it to hand them over voluntarily. The safety violation I'd caught on my first night, the one that would have cost the company its flagship restaurant in an insurance claim 7 figures deep. still uncorrected 6 weeks after I'd flagged it, until I fixed it myself for free. The Portland generator fault. 6 minutes. No injuries, no lawsuit, no headline, because I hadn't waited for jurisdiction to sort itself out. The reputational risk in this room, Augusta said, into the silence Dax's folder left behind, was never Wren Calloway. It was a company that let a woman save it twice and then let a stranger's lies talk us out of protecting her the one time she needed it back. She looked, for one long second, directly at me, standing at the back of a room I hadn't been invited into. I'm not asking permission for this. I'm informing you it's already decided. If that costs us board members, I trust the 12 of you who understand the difference between risk and cowardice to help me find better ones. 2 board members resigned within the week. The other 12 stayed, and one of them, an elderly woman named Prudence Ashcombe, who had known Eleanor Vale personally, found me in the hallway afterward and told me, with the particular bluntness of the very old, that she'd watched Augusta's father hollow this company out one warm thing at a time for 2 decades, and that she had never in her life been so relieved to watch someone's daughter refuse to finish the job. My mother's public reckoning came 3 weeks later at the gala Vale Hospitality threw to celebrate the Portland opening's delayed unveiling. 600 guests, press credentialed at the door, the exact kind of room Renata Calloway had spent her whole life trying to get invited into. She came as Marisol's guest, unaware, until the moment Augusta took the podium, that the evening had been built around a very different kind of announcement. Augusta didn't name her outright. She didn't have to. She spoke instead about competence that gets mistaken for furniture, about a fire blanket and a generator fault, and a woman who had spent 29 years being called reliable by people who never once thought to call her anything better. And then she asked me, in front of 600 people and every camera the city had bothered to send, to come stand beside her. I walked up in a dress that had nothing to do with emerald silk, my father's whistle on a chain around my neck instead of hidden in a pocket, and I watched my mother's face go the color of the tablecloths as Augusta took my hand in front of the room that had, 3 weeks earlier, read a headline calling me calculating. I know what was printed about her, Augusta said, into a microphone that carried her voice to every corner of a room that had once made her a stranger to warmth. I know who printed it, and why. What I know better is this. I have run this company for 5 years being told sentiment was the one thing I couldn't afford. I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am that the woman standing next to me is not a risk. She is the best decision I have ever made, and I intend to keep making it publicly for as long as she'll let me. She turned to me then and got down on one knee in front of 600 witnesses, and a mother who had spent a lifetime teaching me I was worth less than my sister's silk, and produced a ring so simple it could only have been chosen by someone who'd actually listened to every offhand thing I'd ever said about not wanting anything that needed insuring. "Tell me to stop," she said, quiet enough that it was only for me, though the microphone caught it anyway, and 600 people heard the consent gate she offered me even at the very end. "And I will." "Don't stop," I said, the same 2 words from a locked stairwell, and the room broke into something between applause and disbelief. And my mother, I noticed, watching from 3 tables back with a face I had spent my whole life trying to earn a different expression from, said nothing at all for possibly the first time in her life. We married in the spring, in the penthouse garden Augusta had built on the roof of Vale Tower specifically, she admitted, because she'd wanted somewhere private enough that her father couldn't be invited without her having to explain why he wasn't. Marisol stood beside me, not behind me, for the first time in either of our lives, and cried through both vows without apologizing for it once. Dax gave a toast that made Augusta laugh so hard she had to set down her glass, something about 15 years of watching a woman who never waited for anyone finally learn how. And Prudence Ashcombe told me, dancing badly with me during the reception, that Eleanor Vale would have adored me, and that she said so with absolute authority because she'd known her 30 years, and I reminded her, in the best way, of a woman who never once let this family's coldness win. My mother came to the wedding. She did not, in the end, get the reconciliation speech she probably rehearsed on the drive over. I wasn't ready to hand her that yet, and Augusta, without a word, simply stood close enough that Renata Calloway understood, without being told twice, that the clipboard years were over. She hugged me stiffly at the reception and told me, in the closest thing to an apology she has ever managed, that she hadn't known what she had. It wasn't everything. It was, for now, enough of a beginning. The claiming happened that night, in the quiet after the guests had gone, in a room that smelled entirely of us both: black pepper and rain-cold iron, brown sugar and warm linen, tangled together until neither scent stood alone anymore. "Tell me to stop," Augusta said once more, forehead against my throat, the oldest and truest thing she knew how to offer me. "Don't stop," I told her, for the last time that night and the first of 1,000 more, and when her teeth found the mark at my shoulder, the bond settled into me like a held breath, finally released, warm all the way down, and I understood that every invisible year had simply been the long, unglamorous hallway leading to this exact room. A year on, Vale Hospitality's crisis division has my name on the door and Dax's grudging approval on every hire I make. Marisol runs her own publicity firm now, ethical to a fault, and calls me every Sunday just to talk. No agenda, no clipboard, the way sisters are supposed to. My mother visits twice a year and has learned mostly to ask before she assumes. The Lemon Cake Bakery delivers to our penthouse now, on request, every year on my father's birthday, and Augusta sits with me while I eat it and never once tries to fix the grief, only holds it, the way she promised she would that first Sunday on her floor. On quiet mornings, I find her at the window with the city spread out gray and gold below her, and some mornings I still catch, for half a second before she turns, the ghost of the woman who used to stand there alone, believing warmth was a liability. Then she turns and finds me, the way she has found me in every room since a fire alarm went off 40 minutes early on a night neither of us was supposed to remember. My father's whistle hangs now from a hook by our front door. Brass gone soft with handling, a small cold thing that used to mean I have to save myself, and now simply means I already have someone who will help me. It was never the beautiful sister who needed saving, and it was never the frost that needed thawing so much as it needed a reason to believe warmth could survive daylight. It was only ever two women learning, in the space of one crashed blind date, that being overlooked and being unworthy were never the same thing, and that the right person does not require you to shrink yourself to fit inside their notice. She simply notices. Everything. The whole time. The end.